Welcome to Better Husband, the show that helps you answer the simple question, how can I be a better husband? I'm Angelo Santiago, and today I'm joined by Dr. Bruce Chalmer. Dr. Chalmer is a psychologist with over 30 years of experience working with couples, and he's the author of 3 powerful books, including his most recent, Betrayal and Forgiveness, How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again. In this episode, we're diving into some of the biggest challenges men face in their marriages, rebuilding trust, overcoming defensiveness, and creating a deeper connection with your partner. We'll also explore Dr. Chalmers' 7 words framework, be kind, don't panic, and have faith, and how those simple principles can help you grow as a husband. Stick around. This is going to be a good one. Hey, Bruce, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to get into this conversation because trust is such a key aspect of a solid, strong marriage. And we all know that the breaks of trust do happen, whether, like I said at the beginning, big or small. There are actionable steps that we can take in our marriages to rebuild that trust and foster that love and connection once again. So this is a hugely important topic, and I'm excited to get your expertise on it. So thank you for taking the time to be here and share your wisdom and your insights with us.
Well, thank you, Angela. It's delightful to be here, and I'm happy to talk about it. Always happy to talk about the books that I wrote, of course. And, you know, I wrote this last book precisely as you were describing. It's such a big issue in so many of the folks who consult me, in their relationships. It's super important. It comes up a lot. I sort of did a seat of the pants guess about what percentage of the couples I work with are dealing with some kind of betrayal. And like in the first session, that's what they're talking about. I don't know if it's half, but it's close to half. It's a lot. Lots of infidelity, lots of other sorts of things that also qualify in people's minds as betrayal. So I wrote a book about it because I learned a lot from the folks I've worked with.
Yeah, and that actually was going to be my first question, like the inspiration about it. You actually saw a need for this, and you saw people coming in with these big problems. And like I said, they can also be small breaches of trust. But I know that for myself, I've gone through this in my long marriage where there have been moments of rebuilding and understanding like the stages of how to do that, and that it takes time. So just to get going from the beginning, when people come to you or even they're seeking out your book, they may have an idea of how to rebuild trust. But is there any kind of common misconception that couples or individuals have about rebuilding trust that you've seen in, the decades of work that you've been doing this?
Yeah. When you ask it in those terms, what comes to mind is folks who come and the most common betrayal I deal with is infidelity. It happens a lot. And often when they come, both parties, the person who did the cheating, the person who was cheated on, they're hurt, they're upset, all of the above. And what they're saying when they come in is, we just want to go back to how it was. It was good before. We just want to go back to how it was. That's a misconception because you can't go back to how it was. And in fact, how it was is what got you to the problem. So you can't anyway. There's no way you can forget that it happened. You can pretend to forget that it happened, but it doesn't actually work. And moreover, if the relationship is going to survive, the only way it's going to survive is by being better than it was, which is actually good news. And in fact, one of the things I find most inspiring is when I've worked with a couple that does a lot of hard work to be able to rebuild trust, and they are grateful for having gone through what they went through. I've never had anybody say, "Hey, thanks for cheating." Never heard that one. But I have definitely heard people say things to the effect of, "Hey, you know what? Apparently we needed a crisis. I mean, wish you hadn't cheated, but, I see where it came from here. And we needed a crisis, and look how much better off we are now," and all these sorts of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether it's in the marriage space and this infidelity that you're talking about, I can relate to the story that you're telling of, not necessarily being happy about the situation of what happened, right? The pain that you've gone through, the suffering that you've gone through. But once you are on the other side and you can look back and be like, wow, that really hurt. But where it's gotten us, like you said, it's not back the way it was. It's somewhere new. It's somewhere where there is the possibility for reconciliation, for forgiveness, and to rebuild what a new marriage, a new relationship can look like. So I want to talk about that process because it's clearly going to be a long process. Both people have to go through their own stages of that experience, and then the relationship has to go through it too. Um, do you see sort of like, how there's the stages of grief that is often described? Do you see like a pattern of stages that people go through in the process of rebuilding trust from like a major fracture like infidelity or anything like that?
Yeah. You mentioned the stages of grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I actually mentioned her in the book. And and I think even she pointed this out. When you talk about stages, you can have this implication that, well, it always occurs in a particular order, and it doesn't. The usefulness of understanding the notion of stages is just that, well, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen and it doesn't happen all at once. So that's a really good thing to note. So from that perspective, absolutely. Yeah, it depends a lot on the nature of the betrayal. If it's some huge betrayal where somebody is looking at this other person like, I don't know who you are anymore. I thought I could trust you. And now I don't even know if you mean well for me,
Yeah.
There's a level of shock involved in that you have to get through. And, the Kubler-Ross stages are useful there. It's like, well, there's denial and there's anger and there's bargaining and there's, grief and there's acceptance, all of the above, or depression. I think it's one of the ones she said in there. All of those things can come up. And so the initial stages are a lot about getting your feet back under you, getting it, and particularly true for the person who feels betrayed.
Right.
Also true for the one who did the betraying. Some of what comes up in couples work in the early stages is they don't always agree if a betrayal has occurred. Somebody's feeling like it did, or they wouldn't be bringing it up. But the other person may legitimately not agree. They may say, wow, you're thinking of that as a betrayal. And I'm saying, I don't think that's a betrayal. So I've met couples where one person, in this case, it would usually be a woman, feels like it's cheating if he masturbates. And he's thinking, I don't think that's cheating. Been doing it since I was 12. I mean, it's the sort of thing that they can legitimately disagree about. Or what if he's looking at porn? And for many, many more women than feel that masturbation would be cheating, many women feel like that somehow feels like cheating. And where are the lines drawn? All of that stuff. So that's some of the early work that sometimes has to happen. Of course, when it's just clear that no, he was having sex with somebody else and their deal was monogamy and he knows it was wrong and she knows it was wrong. And that's clear. They're usually not, by the time they get to me, that's the situation. They're not arguing about whether it was cheating. I mean, the person who was betrayed has to find some way of feeling like, is it even possible that I can imagine staying with this person? Because sometimes, I've met folks where even if they can get to the point of understanding, even if they get to the point of forgiveness, and I'll talk more about forgiveness in a moment, even if they can get to that point, they could still feel like, I can forgive you in the sense that I don't have to be angry with you anymore. I can understand where it came from, but I just can't wrap my brain around staying married to someone who would do that. But if you can get past that, if people can get to some point of saying, we may not agree on what the nature of this was, but at least maybe we can explore this. Maybe we can start to understand what happened here. Then they've got a shot at being able to get to forgiveness and then building trust. So actually, when we talk about stages, let me talk about it in those terms. In the way I think of it, forgiveness precedes building trust. And it depends on how you use the word forgiveness. And I do write about this considerably in the book. There's basically, I'm oversimplifying, but there's basically two ways of using the word forgiveness. And they're both fine in common use. And one of them I like and the other I don't. The one I don't, but it's very, very common. If somebody says, well, I forgive you, what do they mean? What they mean is I'm willing to restore the relationship with you. I forgive you. I guess, I can get past what happened. Let's carry on as well as we can, or as we did before, or whatever. That's a sense of forgiveness. Sort of like, when you forgive a loan, that word is used for a loan. It makes sense. It's like, I forgive a loan, which is, it's no longer a loan. It's a gift. Forget about it. Let's move on. That sense of forgiveness, it's common parlance, but there's a problem with it because that means you can't forgive someone unless they act in a certain way. In other words, forgiving someone is based on how they interact with you. It'd be very difficult to forgive somebody who keeps on doing what they were doing.
Right.
It would be very difficult to forgive somebody who doesn't express some kind of remorse for it, or doesn't express some sort of understanding of the fact that they hurt you or something, So it puts the power on the side of the person who did the wrong. There's another way of understanding the term forgiveness that is my favorite way. And I did not make up this phrase. I heard it somewhere. I think it's fairly common in 12-step programs, I think. Anyway, it's forgiveness is an inside job. So what do I mean by that? Well, that means if I forgive somebody, that means I get past the shock phase. I don't even have to be angry anymore. I can even develop some sense of understanding that lets me not go into a panic when I think about it. In other words, I'm no longer obsessed with it. I'm no longer triggered by it, to speak in sort of trauma terms. I'm no longer traumatized by it. It's like, okay, well, it happened. Wish it hadn't. It was bad. I was really hurt. Now what? I'm not panicked anymore. Now, that's totally separate from what do I do about the relationship, which becomes the next question. And so that's the sense of forgiveness. I tend to think if you can get there, then you can work on the relationship if you so choose. And that's where a lot of couples have to get before they can do a whole lot about building trust.
So let's move now to like a practical situation, something going on that somebody's listening, and let's bring it down a couple levels. Maybe it's not infidelity, but maybe it's something like you said, hey, my partner talked to me, my wife talked to me, she told me, I really don't want you looking at pornography. That feels like a betrayal of trust. I feel like you're thinking about other women when you're with me, and I don't want you to do that. And the husband hears that, and I'm like, well, okay, I guess I can try and do that. But for a lot of men, I know that is a big challenge. If it's something that they've, have been in their life for decades, it's like to suddenly stop. It is a challenge because it's addictive. It gets that dopamine rush going, and say they agree to it, but now all of a sudden they're struggling, and now they're back to watching pornography, and they don't know how to open up to their partner and say like, hey, this is happening. I'm having a hard time controlling this. I want to do better for you, but I feel like I'm failing. And so that like level of shame sometimes prevents people from even communicating. And now it becomes like this totally hidden thing. There's this fear of being discovered. Like, how do you actually have the conversation of like, I want to do the thing you're asking me for, but I'm still not capable of doing it. I'm still in a way breaking the trust here. Like, what does that conversation look like?
I've had that conversation with many couples actually, or, variations on it. I would back up to the very beginning where the woman is expressing that exactly as you pointed out, this is what I hear from women all the time. What women find objectionable about men looking at porn is that it feels like infidelity because there he is getting turned on by I would say by the image, although she's not thinking of the image, getting turned on by another woman. You're not supposed to get turned on by another woman. I would start right from there, and often do, where we talk about that. And of course, with all the folks I work with, I want to show great respect to everybody's point of view here, but none of them should be the last word, because that's what gets you stuck. And you illustrated the pattern really well, because what happens when you just take that as a given and the guy just says, oh yeah, I get it. Yeah, you're right. I won't do that, because he doesn't want to make her feel bad. You're talking about a good guy here. You're talking about a guy who actually means well. And he's willing to hear what her objection. He doesn't want to make her feel bad. He understands why it might. So he resolves not to, and then it becomes shame. Exactly. Then it's all about shame, which basically eliminates the possibility of an intimate conversation. And that little phrase, intimate conversation, that's sort of my key to everything. If you can actually have a conversation where you both show up and let things be what they are, even though it's uncomfortable. One of my catchphrases, I'm like a bad Borscht Belt comic, I have my catchphrases, my shticks, one of my catchphrases is the chief skill of intimacy is to tolerate anxiety rather than trying to eliminate it. You have to tolerate it. The conversation right from the get-go there could be, I would be wanting to ask the woman, what is it about his porn, when he looks at porn, what is it that really gets to you? And then I would ask him, well, why do you do it? But also, how do you relate to what she's saying? Because the vast majority of us guys will say, oh my God, it's not cheating on you. It's just an image. to us, it doesn't feel like cheating. To women, it often feels like cheating. And, I've also pointed out sometimes it's really all about validating everybody's concern without saying that ends the conversation. I'll often point out there's probably good evolutionary reason why women are offended by that, even though there's also good evolutionary reason why men operate the way we operate. Where the conversation goes when it doesn't work well is when the guy just tries to tell the woman, why do you have to think that way? And when the woman just tells the man, why do you have to think that way? As opposed to both of them saying, there's reasons why you think that way. You're different from me, aren't you? There's good reason for that. In fact, some of those differences are pretty attractive, but they also drive us nuts.
The other thing I want to talk about is in rebuilding trust, especially in betrayal. What you see a lot of on the internet and it's just people sharing stories of where they've been betrayed. My husband cheated on me. My wife cheated on me. And the initial messages from the world out there is, why are you still with them? Dump them, get rid of them, break. So these outside forces have no idea what's going on internally. And so there's almost like a stigma within a couple that if there's been infidelity or if there's been a big breach of trust, whatever that may be, it's like if anybody knew about it, they would tell us to break up. Why should I want to stay together? Mm-hmm. And what I would want to say, and then I want to hear what you would want to say, is like, this is your life. This is your marriage. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. You have to push those voices aside. If you both want to work on this and get to that next place that you talked about at the beginning of the podcast, not the way things were, but the way things could be, it's going to take almost like an insulation of the marriage to protect it in a way. So I'd love to hear what you say about that in terms of, the external factors coming in and kind of pushing the ship around against its will.
Oh yeah, no, of course I see that all the time. That phenomenon. Let's say it's the guy who's cheated on his wife, and the wife is saying, if you had asked me 6 months ago, however long ago, would I stay with my husband if he cheated? I would have said absolutely not. And then it happens. And then she's realizing, but I love him, even though, yes, he's hurt me terribly, but I don't want to blow up our life. And oh my God, if I tell my friends or family or whatever, or when I've told my friends and family, all they tell me is, oh my God, you can't trust him, dump him. And often therapists will imply this too, by the way. There are lots of therapists that basically would rather break you up than fix something. And it's based on an understanding of relationships that is often somewhat cynical. And I say, I say that with all due respect, because there's lots of points of view and they all have their reason for existing. I'll get comments on the videos that I post about this kind of stuff where some people just say, you can never trust somebody who's cheated on you. And it's not a crazy notion that it's difficult to trust someone who's cheated on you, but no, I've actually seen relationships repair, and like we were saying before, and they're grateful for having gone through it. So that is a difficult part of it, having to recognize that there's lots of external forces, and sorting out what you're going to take in and what you're not is often, it's just more pain dumped on the person who was hurt.
Yeah.
I do point out in the book, actually, what you need, of course, from your friends is not telling you what to do. What you need from a therapist is not telling you what to do, or from a clergy person is not telling you what to do. What you need is somebody who actually will sit with you where you are and reflect back to you that, the faith that you are a competent, intelligent person who can figure out your life even when it's difficult. And that's going to actually help you make such decisions as you can make. And, I pointed that out in the book that, that's the kind of friend you want. And if you are one of those friends, there's a special place in heaven for you, because that's the kind of friend you should be to somebody.
Real quick, before we get back to the show, if you're like me and you're a busy husband with a lot on your plate, sometimes you hear something on this podcast, an idea or a specific practice or a suggestion, and you have every intention of doing the thing that you just heard. But life gets busy, and sometimes you forget. Well, that's why I created the Better Husband Toolkit. This is a short, concise, downloadable cheat sheet with 3 of the most important relational skills I believe every husband should know and have in their tool belt in order to improve their marriage. If you're asking yourself, how can I be a better husband today? Go to betterhusbandtoolkit.com and download the short document. And if you have any questions, you can email me. I'd be happy to offer you some more support. Again, go to betterhusbandtoolkit.com or click the link in the show notes and get your toolkit today. Now back to the show. Well, let's transition a little bit to some actionable steps, some practical information that anyone who's listening right now that's listening and wondering, how can I be a better husband in this way? How can I actually help rebuild trust over time in my marriage? Whether the breaking of the trust was something big like we're talking about, or even like, you have a partner who never shows up on time for dinner, says they're going to do something and they don't do it. And there's that lack of trust. It's like, well, I can't ask you for anything because I don't trust that you're going to actually do the thing. But now suddenly I have this realization, so you know what, they're right. I want to rebuild the trust. But it may be just saying those words, just telling your wife that like, okay, I promise from now on, it's going to be different. I want to rebuild. That's not enough. Like there's going to have to be, habits and practices that you're going to have to do every single day to slowly rebuild. So when you work with couples and you see they're in that process of rebuilding, they've gotten to the forgiveness point. They have the desire to be together and work on this. What are some recommended practices that you have them do together or individually that guides them in the right direction?
Yeah. Well, here comes a slightly grandiose statement, which I guess if you're going to write books, you got to have some degree of grandiosity in you. The only thing that really rebuilds trust is mutual understanding. And I say that because let me say some things that don't rebuild trust. Being somebody's parole officer does not rebuild trust. Setting up in the never mind infidelity, the situation you described, which is also very common, as you point out, that phenomenon where, let's say the guy keeps coming home late and not telling her, and she has her good reasons, and he can even understand the good reasons, but he keeps not doing it. If he just resolves to do better, if I were the woman, I would be thinking, I trust your sincerity in that, but I can't imagine what's any different because I don't think you've been a terrible person up to now that you've been doing it. So what's different? He could say, well, now I understand how much it bothers you. And she's thinking, are you that stupid? I mean, you would have, if you'd given it half a moment's thought, why wouldn't you have thought of that? You actually have to dive a little deeper into it and develop some mutual understanding where she might come to recognize, gee, why does he seem sort of resistant to this? And he has to think, why am I sort of resistant to that? And what could come out of that? He might say, I think there's something about it where I'm just sort of feeling like you're trying to control me too much, even though that's probably not fair. But I think it's this sort of adolescent feeling that's popping up in me, And she's thinking, I can kind of see why that is because I sort of turn into your mom sometimes and you don't like that and I don't like that. But I don't want you to, you turn into the teenage kid. I don't want you to do that. He's saying, I don't want to do that either. When they can actually develop that sense of adult understanding of themselves and each other, that's when actual change will happen. I'll tell you what won't help is making rules. It just won't help. I'm not against rules, by the way. Rules are descriptions of what people are doing when it's going well. It's just that trying to imitate the rules won't make you do well. You have to be doing well to follow the rules. So it's mutual understanding that produces trust. So what does that mean in practice? That means being able to entertain, if somebody's been resisting doing something the other person wants, you better entertain why. You better, both of you, be able to go into, why is that happening? What's going on for you? And be willing to be like politically incorrect, be willing to go to places that, I wish I didn't, like for men a lot, we often think women are idiots. Well, don't get me wrong. We're wrong about that. We are flat out wrong about that. I mean, I'm clear, but we act a lot as if we think women are idiots. And a lot of what we do is based on that kind of stereotype that we carry around with us. And it drives women nuts, of course. And I'm not trying to let women off the hook either, by the way. Women have all sorts of stereotypes that aren't very nice either. But you kind of have to face that because that sort of thing plays out in all sorts of ways that we don't notice. We make assumptions. Who's the one who's supposed to set up all the doctor's appointments? Who's the one who's supposed to, all the emotional labor that a lot of women will talk about? Why is it always the default to the woman? On the one hand, you could say, oh my God, that's evil and men should learn how to be better. On the other hand, it's like, no, there's probably reasons why that comes to be, and we better be able to explore that. And I'm not trying to say that, we should freeze everything in concrete in 1955. Which, by the way, I'm old enough to remember 1955. I was 4 years old at the time. So there you go. You can do the math. But I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we have to accept that we're the ways we are, probably for good reason. And then, when you can get into it without shame, then you can actually discover the change will happen. And change will happen organically rather than by imposing some sort of rule.
So what about, say, like we said, whoever's listening to us speak right now, they have a desire to do better.
Yep.
Maybe they're actually taking the steps. So, there's been an understanding of the breach of trust. There's been a desire of like, okay, this is how we're going to rebuild. I'm going to show up every single day and I'm going to do the right things. I'm going to, whatever it may be, stop looking at pornography or show up on time or make sure I do all the things that I said I was going to do. And I'm doing them day in and day out. But for some reason, it doesn't feel like anything's changing. Maybe their partner's not being receptive to the work that they're doing. They still struggle to be like, I still don't know if I can trust you. And here they are, it feels like they're banging their head up against the wall because they're doing all the things that they feel like they're supposed to do and they're doing it right. But it's like they're getting exhausted by it because they're not seeing the change that they were hoping for.
Yeah.
What do you see in that process, both for the person being open to the receptivity of the change, but also the encouragement to the guy who is trying to do the right thing and not seeing the results yet?
Yeah. Yeah. There are variations on that theme that I see, of course, a lot, where anytime if I'm the one who's done the wrong, whatever it is, the breaking of trust, big or small, and I'm trying to rebuild trust, then inevitably I'm going to be the one who's more impatient that says, can't you get over this? That's pretty much invariably the case. It's like, yeah, I'm going to wish, is it still about that time that I didn't call you before I came home late? Or more likely, is it still about that time 3 years ago that I cheated on you? Yeah. Frankly, it is still about that time. So what do you do about that? I note often that the trust has to be rebuilt in both directions, that it's not only that she's got to trust him if he's the one who did whatever the wrong thing was, he's got to trust that she can forgive him. And that's not a given. In other words, it's, if you can't, most people don't want a relationship where one person is the permanent villain and the other is the permanent victim. That is not a way that people want to live, mostly. If they're seeing a therapist, that's typically not what they're looking to achieve. And so it's one of the most unfair things about a lot of this. At a certain point, it falls to the person who was hurt to recognize the other person can't fix them. They're going to have to actually do the work of choosing to heal or not. And it can feel like a bitter pill to swallow. It's like, you mean I have to actually willingly say, I'm not going to blame everything on him anymore. And on his end, he's going to have to be able to say, I'm not willing to stay in a relationship where I am viewed as the permanent villain, even though God knows I deserve to have been viewed as a villain for what I did. But I am resolving to do better. Whether or not she trusts me, I can totally understand why she's cautious about it. But I'm not willing to stay in a relationship that is going to be, where I can't feel a sense of dignity. And when they can actually get there, that's an enormous amount of tolerating anxiety to be able to have that conversation. And when they can do that, then they've got a shot. And, I also note, this is with respect to that sort of situation. Lots of couples break up. Well, there's a brilliant observation, right? Took me years of graduate school to come up with that one, right? Yeah, it's not quite half of first marriages in this country anymore, but it's in the 40s. It's well into the 40s. And so, it's a little lower than it was a couple decades ago, but it's still, many, many first marriages break up. And so often if people say, what percentage of the couples you work with, does the work succeed? Well, it depends on how you define success. I don't define success as merely that they stay together. I also recognize that in that evaluation of did it succeed or not, there are 3 different people involved in that evaluation. Me, and my opinion should be the least important, of course, and then the couple, and they may differ on that. And I've met plenty of couples where one person thinks, oh my God, this is just what we needed, and they break up because they have clarity. And the other person maybe doesn't like that. I've met couples where both parties realize, oh my God, you know what? We're 2 decent people. We can even forgive each other, but we can't stay together. We're just not right for each other. There are deal breakers that emerge. And then there's the ones where they can both feel, the ones I like, the ones that give my heart a lift are where they both feel like, oh my God, we're so much better off and we love staying together and thank you for this work. And isn't it great? Those are the ones I hope for. But again, I don't count the others. I don't count the ones where they break up as necessarily a failure. That's what success looks like for them.
So let's close out here with just a conversation for, let's say, it could be a newlywed couple, or it could be a couple where things are going well. Like there has not been any betrayal. Like the trust is strong in the relationship and their intention is to keep it that way. What proactive steps do you encourage a husband to take, or even the couple to take together, to keep that strong trust intact?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the two things occur to me. First, there's that 7 words you mentioned in the intro. We even have it on merch. This is a cup from our podcast. I'm putting in a plug for our podcast, which you're going to be a guest on, by the way. So
I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, we're looking forward to that too. I do that together with my wife, Judy Alexander. And the 7 words, as you said earlier, are be kind, don't panic, and have faith. That's kind of a summary, oversimplified summary of what I would tell that newlywed couple. Be kind in the sense of kinship, not just being nice. Of course, be nice, but you're not always going to be nice because you're a human being, but maintain that sense of kinship, which means, okay, we're on the same team here, and you can't do that if you're in a panic. So that's where don't panic comes from. So learn how to recognize if you're on the verge of panic and try and intervene with yourself so you don't panic. And the antidote to panic is what I mean by faith. And I don't mean necessarily religious faith, although religious faith is helpful for many people. But I mean more generally, faith is when you have this sense that somehow there's some rightness about all this business. The reality is right to be what it is. And so in that sense, that it's, what I was talking about when I was noting, hey, men and women are often different about things, and that's not bad. That turns out to be good. That's the sense of faith. It's like, okay, so that leads to what I have also in my, apparent willingness to be grandiose again, I've decided is the one skill that solves all relationship problems. See, I should have just told you that right in the beginning. We wouldn't have to have this conversation. The one skill that solves all relationship problems is, drum roll, the ability to be moderately annoyed. It's the ability to be moderately annoyed. Because the one thing I know with everybody I work with, and it's true of you and me as well, probably me more than you, is that we're all annoying. My wife isn't nearly as annoying as I am. God knows. She's lovely about putting up with my being so annoying, that phenomenon. And, I'm laughing about it. But partly I mean it in a serious way. The ability to be moderately annoyed as opposed to totally freaked out, because that's what lets you not panic. Moderate annoyance is another way of saying you haven't crossed over into panic. It's like, well, that's annoying. Whatever. So do I take it up with her, or does she take it up with me or not? She does or she doesn't, and if she does, great. And if she chooses not to, that's fine, as long as it's just moderate. And if it gets to the point of saying, well, I really do want to say something about this, it's still moderate if you're in that place of saying, I don't have to think you're evil incarnate. I just wish you would do what our favorite go-to is, I wish you would wipe down the sink after you brush your teeth. It took her several years to come up with telling me that. And, because she had been in a previous relationship where that wouldn't have been a safe thing to say. And, but she finally said, and I'm hearing it, and she was really nice about saying it, she just asked for it. I hadn't even noticed it. And the funny thing that happened with that was, not only did of course I was happy, I want to make her happy. When things are going well, you want to make each other happy. You sort of fall over each other and make each other happy. It's great. It puts a smile on both faces. And then the funny thing that happened with that one was I actually internalized it. I'm not doing it for her anymore. I'm doing it for me. It's like, no, I don't like it when I leave water all over the sink either. So I wipe it down for me, and that benefits her too. So the point being, if you can not panic, and if you can experience annoyance and not have it cross into panic, you'll be okay. You will or you won't. Maybe you'll encounter some deal breaker down the line, but if things look good for starters, those are the practices that will keep things going.
Be kind, don't panic, have faith. I like that. I like what you're talking about in that don't panic, in that annoyance that comes up. What I see that is like, this is some information that there's something happening here that is kind of like getting under my skin. And then there's the question, like, is this something that needs to be taken care of, or like, do I need to just like relax a little bit?
Yeah.
And if it is, and here's what I always like to teach is like, if it is something that needs to be changed in your relationship for whatever reason, if it feels like a big deal, then what I like what you said in your example, it's like, have that conversation, like, in a good way, in a respectful way, in a desire of like, hey, this this is what this does for me if you just wipe down the sink after you brush your teeth. Because what that is, it's more assertion up front and less resentment on the back, right?
Yeah.
Or I could say nothing and it's all this resentment keeps building, we're building. And then all of a sudden the dirty sink is going to, lead to a ridiculous argument that is just could have been handled right then and there. So Bruce, it's been awesome talking to you. I really appreciate the decades of experience you've brought to Better Husband, everything that you've shared. Hopefully, if you're listening to this, something of this conversation has helped you today to get you in the direction of being that better husband you want to be and can be also. So before we say goodbye, two things. Where can people find out more about you? Get the book and all your other books as well. There's so much more that you've worked on beyond this that I would encourage all the listeners to check out. And then if there's one last piece of advice, something that you came on here on your heart, there's like, I just want to make sure that the guys listening get this piece. What would that be?
Well, so I'll answer the first question first. My website is brucechalmer.com. Go there and it's got information about all the stuff, including the fact I do telehealth. So if people are interested in actually working with me, and I accept couples basically, as I work with a couple by telehealth. So if they're interested in that, they can find information about that at brucechalmer.com. All of my books, as you pointed out, there's information there as well. They're all available any place you can get books, and everybody knows how to do that these days. And in terms of, what one bit of advice would I give? And again, I'm thinking especially your listeners who are husbands, right? They're husbands who care. What a great group of people you have, right?
Yes.
There ought to be more of us. You should have a lot of listeners. I hope you do. The one bit of advice I would say is, on the one hand, don't be ashamed of being a guy. It's okay to be a guy. And I guess it's that point I mentioned earlier. We as men, I think, do need to be aware of some of the ways we have often thought about women that just don't serve us well in relationships with women. It's much more about respect. It's about developing respect that's really based on a sense of, they know some stuff we don't. We know some stuff they don't also, by the way. But they do know some stuff we don't. It's good to know that and respect it. And usually women respond well to respect. Well, so do we, don't we? So it's, learn how to respect your wife even more than you do. Genuinely, not just think you're respecting her, because we all think we're respecting our wives, but really, really be open to that sense without going into being ashamed of who you are as a guy. No, she wanted a guy. You should be a guy.
Very well said, Bruce. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here once again. I'll have all the links in the show notes. Check out brucechalmer.com and everything that he's written. Get in touch with him if you want to learn more. And I just want to say, for all you listening or watching this, thank you for joining us on Better Husband. I'm Angelo Santiago. Thanks for being a part of this community, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, I have a quick request. If you've ever gotten any value from the show and you want the show to continue to grow, to access bigger and more knowledgeable guests, and to keep providing you with more ways that you can be a better husband in your marriage, simply leave a rating and a review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a few seconds, and those reviews go a long way in attracting more experts and bigger guests to the show. So if you're feeling up to it, as a favor to me, I'd love to see a rating and a review from you. Thank you so much for being a listener and all your support.